It was 2022, in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where every drive home feels the same because the streets don't really change. I remember turning onto our road and already feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. Not panic. Not yet. Just that sense that I was walking back into something I couldn't name. The house looked normal from the outside. Lights on in the front room. A couple of toys in the yard. The porch light buzzing like it always did. If you passed by, you'd think it was just another young family ending another weekday. But I'd started noticing the silence. Not literal silence. The TV would be on, the kitchen fan would be humming, our kid would be talking a mile a minute. It was more like, the space between us was getting louder. Like every small interaction was wrapped in cotton and nothing landed the way it used to. That night, I parked a little crooked and just sat there for a second with my hands on the steering wheel. I was tired, and I didn't want to admit how relieved I felt to be alone in the car. I could see movement through the curtains. Shadows passing. I told myself I was being dramatic. That every couple has weird phases. That it would pass if I didn't poke at it too much. I grabbed my bag and walked up the steps. When I opened the door, warm air hit me, that mix of dinner smells and laundry detergent. Our kid ran to me immediately, arms out, asking if I brought anything. I lifted her up, kissed her head, and smiled like I meant it. Behind her, my wife was in the kitchen. She looked up, smiled a quick smile, and went right back to what she was doing. It was polite. It was normal. It was the kind of smile you give a neighbor you don't dislike. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she said back. That was it. No kiss. No hand on my shoulder. No, "How was your day?" Not even a fake version of it. Just two people marking attendance. I told myself she was tired. We were both tired. We had a kid, we had a house, we had bills, we had the constant pressure of trying to stay afloat. It didn't have to mean anything. It didn't have to mean the thing my brain kept circling around. Dinner was fine. That's the word I kept using, fine. Our kid talked. I nodded along. My wife asked one or two questions that sounded like they were meant for someone else. At one point our kid spilled water and I reached for a towel. My wife reached too. Our hands bumped. It was nothing. It should have been nothing. But she pulled her hand away like she'd touched something hot. Quick. Automatic. Like her body reacted before her face could. She didn't apologize. She didn't look at me. She just wiped up the water and went back to eating. I watched her like I was trying to solve a math problem. Same face. Same hair. Same voice. But the warmth wasn't there. The part of her that used to feel open to me was closed. Locked from the inside. Later, after bedtime, the house went quiet in that specific way it does when the lights are off but your mind stays bright. I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand, scrolling without reading anything. She moved around the kitchen, cleaning, putting things away. She didn't ask me to help. She didn't complain that I wasn't helping. It was like she'd decided her life was easier if she didn't need anything from me. I tried to start a conversation anyway. I didn't even have a plan. I just needed to hear her say something that felt real. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. I waited. "You sure?" She sighed, not big, not dramatic. Just a controlled breath like I was wasting her time. I'm fine. I'd asked that question so many times in the past few months that I could hear how it sounded. Like I was needy. Like I was fishing. Like I wanted a fight. But I wasn't trying to start something. I was trying to get back to the version of us that made sense. She went into the hallway and came back with her phone. She sat on the other end of the couch, angled slightly away from me. Her thumb moved across the screen, fast, practiced, like she had somewhere else to be. I could have left it there. I knew I should have. There's a point where you feel the tension in your own body and you realize you're about to make it worse. But I couldn't keep swallowing it. Not anymore. I feel like you don't even want me near you, I said. She didn't look up. That's not true. It feels true. That got her attention. Not because she cared about how I felt, but because I'd said it out loud. She set her phone down slowly and looked at me like she was measuring how much energy this would cost. What do you want me to say? She asked. I hated that question. It made it sound like my feelings were a script she didn't want to read. I don't know, I said. Something. Anything. Because this isn't normal. She stared at the wall over my shoulder for a second, then looked back at me. Her eyes weren't angry. They were empty. Like she'd already had this conversation in her head and decided the outcome. I just don't think about it the way you do, she said. About what? About us, she said. About, whatever this is. My stomach tightened. I kept my voice calm because I didn't want our kid to hear. I didn't want to become the kind of father who raises his voice through walls. What are you saying? I asked. She shrugged. I'm saying we're different. We're more like friends. The words hit me like a slap, even though she said them like she was commenting on the weather. Like she was describing a fact she'd accepted months ago. I felt my mouth go dry. Friends? She nodded, once. Yeah. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind her of everything we'd built, every sacrifice, every plan. I wanted to grab those words out of the air and shove them back into her mouth. Instead, I just sat there, staring at her, trying to understand how someone can live next to you and quietly decide your marriage is already over. And the worst part was, looking at her face, I realized she wasn't saying it to hurt me. She was saying it because, to her, it was already true. When I think back to the beginning, it's strange how solid everything felt. Not dramatic. Not intense in a movie kind of way. Just steady. Safe. Like something you could lean on without worrying it would move. We met years earlier, in a phase of my life where I wasn't looking for anything serious. I just finished one chapter and hadn't figured out what the next one was supposed to be. She came into my life quietly. No big entrance. No sparks that knocked me over. Just conversation that didn't feel forced. We talked easily. That was the first thing that stuck with me. There was comfort in how quickly we settled into each other's routines. Long calls that drifted into silence without either of us rushing to fill it. Simple plans. Walks, cheap food, sitting side by side doing our own things. It felt adult in a way I hadn't experienced before. Like we were choosing each other, not escaping something else. She told me early on that stability mattered to her. That she didn't want chaos. I took that seriously. I wanted to be someone dependable. Someone she could trust. I wasn't perfect. I worked long hours back then, and I was distracted more often than I should have been. But I showed up. I listened. I tried to learn how to be the kind of partner who didn't disappear when things got uncomfortable. When she got pregnant, everything shifted fast. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't a disaster either. There was fear, sure. Long nights talking in circles. Questions we didn't have answers to yet. But underneath all of that was a shared decision: we were going to do this together. That decision changed how I saw us. Suddenly, the future wasn't abstract anymore. It was concrete. It had weight. Every choice mattered because it wasn't just about us, it was about someone else who would depend on us completely. I stepped up the way I thought I was supposed to. Took on more responsibility. Put away the version of myself that could afford to be careless. I focused on work, on saving, on planning. I told myself that love wasn't just about how you feel. It was about what you build. She seemed grateful for that. At least at first. We moved in together not long after. The place wasn't special, but it was ours. Boxes everywhere. Arguments over where things should go. Late nights assembling furniture with instructions that never made sense. Those were good memories. Not perfect, but real. Our daughter arrived, and for a while everything else faded into the background. Life became smaller and bigger at the same time. Smaller because our world revolved around feedings, naps, routines. Bigger because the stakes were suddenly enormous. We were exhausted. Both of us. But I remember feeling proud. Proud of her, proud of us. Proud that we were making it work. There were cracks, even then. I can see them now. She struggled with feeling seen. She'd tell me she felt invisible, like she'd lost herself. I'd try to reassure her, but I didn't always know how. I thought providing stability was the same thing as emotional presence. I didn't realize those weren't interchangeable. When she pulled away emotionally, I leaned in practically. When she felt uncertain, I tried to fix things. I became the one who adjusted. Who compromised? Who asked, "What can I do better?" At the time, it felt like love. We got married quietly. No big wedding. Just a promise, a few signatures, and a shared understanding that this was the right thing to do. I remember standing there thinking how lucky I was that something in my life felt decided. Marriage didn't change much day to day, but it changed how permanent everything felt. Like we'd crossed a line you don't casually step back over. Over the years, I kept measuring myself against what I thought she needed. If she was unhappy, I assumed I'd missed something. If she was distant, I told myself to try harder. I didn't see that I was slowly teaching her that my role was to absorb discomfort and hers was to judge whether I was doing enough. We talked about the future a lot. Not in detail, but in that vague, reassuring way. One day. Eventually. When things settle down. Those phrases became a kind of glue, holding us together even when the present felt shaky. Buying a house was supposed to be the proof that we'd made it. We spent months looking. Arguing about neighborhoods, budgets, layouts. Imagining where furniture would go. Where our daughter would play. It felt like we were investing in permanence. When we finally moved in, I remember standing in the empty living room, keys in my hand, thinking this was it. This was the life I'd been working toward. I didn't realize how much of my identity I'd wrapped around being the one who holds everything together. The more responsibility I took on, the more I believed that was what made me valuable. That if I stayed steady enough, reliable enough, loving enough, everything else would fall into place. Looking back, I can see how that dynamic set the tone for everything that followed. I was always explaining myself. Always checking in. Always trying to read between her silences. I thought that was what commitment looked like. Staying, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. And to be fair, there were good times. Laughing in the kitchen. Late-night talks when things felt close again. Moments where she'd reach for my hand or lean into me on the couch, and I'd think, there it is. We're okay. Those moments mattered to me more than I admitted. I clung to them like proof that whatever felt off was temporary. I didn't know then that you can build something real with someone who's already halfway gone. At the time, all I knew was that I loved her, I loved our child, and I believed, without questioning it, that effort and loyalty were enough to keep a relationship alive. I had no idea that while I was focused on building a future, she might already have been imagining a different life altogether. And if I'm honest, the scariest part isn't that I missed the signs. It's that, even now, I can't tell exactly when the foundation started to crack. The first time she said she wasn't sure about us, it came out of nowhere. At least that's how it felt to me. We were sitting in the car, parked outside our place, the engine still running. I remember that detail because I didn't turn it off right away. I didn't know how long the conversation was going to last, and some part of me didn't want to make it official by shutting the engine down. She stared straight ahead and said, "I don't know if this is what I want anymore." No build-up. No warning. Just that. I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't catch up. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "I just feel stuck. Like we're doing this because we already started, not because it's right." I felt something drop in my chest. Not anger. Fear. The kind that makes you replay every moment from the last year, looking for the mistake you must have made. We talked for hours. Or maybe I talked and she listened. I asked questions. I tried to understand. She kept circling the same ideas, feeling disconnected, not feeling excited, feeling like something was missing. I took all of it personally. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse her of being unfair or impulsive. I asked what I could do differently. What she needed. What I'd failed to notice. That was the moment the balance shifted, even if I didn't see it then. From that point on, the relationship felt conditional. Like I was on probation, waiting to see if I'd earn back something I hadn't realized I'd lost. I started paying closer attention to myself than to her. Watching my tone. Measuring my reactions. Making sure I didn't say the wrong thing. I became careful in a way I hadn't been before. When she pulled back, I leaned in harder. When she seemed distant, I tried to be more present. I read articles. I listened to podcasts. I told myself this was what growth looked like. She noticed the change. She even acknowledged it. "You're really trying," she said once. I appreciate that. Those words meant more to me than they should have. They felt like approval. Like proof that I was fixing whatever was broken. Eventually, she said she wanted to keep trying. That she didn't want to end things. That she just needed to feel more secure. I latched onto that. I told myself the crisis was over. But it wasn't really over. It just changed shape. From then on, any time there was tension, my first instinct was to look inward. What had I done? What had I missed? What should I adjust? I stopped expecting her to meet me halfway emotionally. I didn't consciously decide that, but it happened all the same. I became the one who reassured. The one who initiated conversations. The one who smoothed things over. She, on the other hand, became more guarded. Less expressive. Like she was holding on to an exit she didn't want to admit she still needed. When we talked about the future after that, it always felt tentative. Not on the surface, she still made plans, talked about us, but underneath there was a fragility I couldn't ignore. I responded to that fragility by doubling down. When we discussed buying a house, I treated it like a recommitment ceremony. I told myself that no one invests that much into something they're not serious about. That shared debt and shared walls meant shared intention. We toured places together. She'd comment on kitchens, on light, on space for our kid. She sounded engaged. Interested. Normal. I took that as a sign that we were past the worst of it. During the renovation, I did most of the heavy lifting. Long days. Late nights. I told myself it was temporary. That once things settled, we'd finally have the life we'd been working toward. I didn't resent her for pulling back during that time. I thought stress explained it. New responsibilities. Adjustment. Everyone handles pressure differently. There were moments, though, when I felt like I was carrying something alone. I'd come home exhausted, wanting to talk, and she'd already be in her own world. Phone in hand. Head somewhere else. I'd tell myself not to read into it. Anytime doubt crept in, I reminded myself of that earlier fracture. How close we'd come to ending everything. How much worse it could be if I pushed too hard. So I didn't. I chose patience. Understanding. Silence. Looking back, I can see how that created a kind of dependency. Not just emotionally, but structurally. Our lives became so intertwined that the idea of separating felt impossible. And I think she knew that. We shared finances. Shared routines. Shared a child who anchored us to each other in ways that went beyond love. I believed that mattered more than feelings that came and went. The strange thing is, she never stopped saying she cared about me. She never openly rejected the life we were building. She just withheld parts of herself. At the time, I thought that was something I could earn back. I thought if I stayed consistent, if I didn't give her reasons to doubt, she'd eventually feel safe enough to fully return. I didn't understand that by making myself responsible for the relationship's survival, I was also giving her permission to disengage without consequence. When she finally said, years later, that we felt more like friends, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a long stretch of time where I'd been proving I was willing to stay no matter what, and she'd been deciding, quietly, whether that was enough. And the truth is, by the time I realized how unbalanced things had become, I didn't know how to change it without risking everything we'd built. So I kept going. Kept investing. Kept believing that recommitment was the same thing as resolution. I didn't see that the fracture we'd worked through had never actually healed. It had just taught us different roles. And I was playing mine exactly the way she'd learned to expect. The shift didn't happen all at once. That's what made it so hard to name. If there had been a single argument, a clear betrayal, something loud enough to point at, I think I would have trusted myself sooner. Instead, it was a slow thinning. Like a sound fading until you're not sure when it stopped. It started with distance. Not physical at first, but emotional. She was there, technically. In the same rooms. Same routines. But she wasn't with me anymore. Conversations became shorter. Functional. We talked about schedules, groceries, our kid. The things that had to be handled. Anything beyond that felt like pushing against a closed door. Intimacy changed too. She stopped reaching for me. Stopped initiating. When I tried, she'd turn away or say she was tired. Or stressed. Or not in the mood. All of those things were reasonable on their own. Life was busy. We were adults. I didn't want to be the guy who complained about that. Still, months went by like that. Once or twice a month, maybe. And even then, it felt distant. Like she was somewhere else, checking something off a list. I asked if something was wrong. Carefully at first. Then more directly. She always said no. Nothing's wrong, she'd say. Why do you keep asking? That question made me feel like I was inventing problems. Like the discomfort was a flaw in me, not a reaction to anything real. So I tried to quiet it. I told myself this was what long-term relationships looked like. That passion fades. That stability replaces it. That wanting more meant I was unrealistic or needy. But there were moments that didn't fit that explanation. She started guarding her phone more closely. Not dramatically. Just small things. Tilting the screen away. Keeping it face down. Taking it with her when she left the room, even briefly. I noticed, and then immediately told myself not to notice. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to become someone who policed their partner. Trust mattered to me. Or at least, the idea of trust did. Her schedule shifted too. New commitments. New routines. Things that didn't involve me. She'd tell me about them, but always after the fact. Like I was being informed, not included. I'd ask questions, trying to sound casual. She'd answer, but there was a flatness to it. Like she was reading from a prepared response. "You're overthinking," she said more than once. That phrase became a kind of reset button. Any concern I raised got folded back into my supposed tendency to worry too much. And maybe I did. I was aware of that. I'd always been introspective. Prone to self-doubt. I used that against myself constantly. If she came home late, I assumed traffic. If she was distant, I assumed stress. If she seemed annoyed when I tried to connect, I assumed I was pushing too hard. I kept adjusting. There was one night that stuck with me, even though nothing happened. She said she'd be out later than usual. Something about an obligation she hadn't mentioned before. She sent a message saying not to wait up. I didn't think much of it at the time. But when she got home, she seemed different. Not drunk. Not obviously guilty. Just charged. Energized in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. She talked more. Laughed more. Then, unexpectedly, she reached for me. It caught me off guard. My first instinct was relief. Like finally, we were back. That night, I let myself believe things were improving. The next morning, she was distant again. Colder than before. Like whatever had sparked between us had already burned out. I didn't bring it up. I didn't want to break the illusion. There were other things too. Little contradictions in her stories. Minor details that didn't line up. I'd notice them, feel that tug in my gut, and then talk myself out of it. Everyone forgets things. Everyone mixes up details. I didn't want to turn inconsistencies into accusations. Still, I felt like I was walking on uneven ground. I started paying attention to my own behavior more than hers. Watching how often I spoke. How much space I took up. Whether I was being too much. I remember thinking, if I can just stay calm, she'll come back to me. Looking back, that thought alone should have scared me. There was a point where I almost asked directly if there was someone else. The words were right there. Sitting on my tongue. But I didn't say them. I was afraid of the answer, sure. But I was also afraid of what asking would mean. That once you voice that suspicion, things can't go back to the way they were. Even if you're wrong. So I waited for clarity instead. What I got was more fog. She'd have days where she was warm again. Engaged. Almost affectionate. Those days messed with my head more than the cold ones. They felt like proof that my doubts were unfair. That I was imagining distance where there was just normal fluctuation. Then the warmth would vanish without explanation. I asked her once if she still wanted to be with me. Not dramatically. Just quietly. She looked surprised. Almost annoyed. Why would you ask that? She said. I didn't have a clean answer. Because everything felt off wasn't a concrete enough reason. I just feel like you're not here anymore, I said. She shook her head. You're reading too much into things. That was the pattern. I brought feelings. She brought logic. And logic always won. After a while, I stopped trusting my instincts altogether. I told myself that if something was truly wrong, it would be obvious. That betrayal doesn't hide in plain sight. That people don't just live double lives without leaving clear evidence. I didn't understand how wrong I was about that. What I did understand was that something between us had shifted into a shape I didn't recognize. A version of our relationship where I was constantly bracing, constantly adjusting, constantly afraid of saying the wrong thing. I felt lonely even when she was sitting next to me. And yet, every time I tried to step back emotionally, something would pull me forward again. A kind word. A shared moment. A reminder of who she used to be with me. I clung to those moments because they felt like lifelines. I didn't know then that what I was holding onto wasn't the present. It was a memory. And the longer I stayed focused on preserving that memory, the easier it became for everything else to slip past me unnoticed. The first real crack didn't come from her. It came from someone else. A casual comment. The kind that feels harmless until it isn't. A friend mentioned seeing her one afternoon, getting dropped off a few streets away from our house. Not right outside. Not close enough to wave. Just far enough that it stuck out. He didn't make a big deal of it. He almost sounded unsure. Like he was worried he might have gotten it wrong. I laughed it off at first. Said something about ride-sharing or car trouble. Even as the words came out of my mouth, they felt thin. That night, I asked her about it. I didn't accuse. I didn't even frame it as suspicion. I told her what I'd heard and asked if it made sense to her. She looked genuinely confused. I have no idea what he's talking about. Her answer came quickly. No hesitation. No defensiveness. Just dismissal. That should have reassured me. And for a moment, it did. But then she added, "People see things wrong all the time." The conversation ended there. She went back to what she was doing, and I stood there feeling like I'd imagined the whole thing. I told myself I was lucky to have a partner who didn't immediately assume bad intentions. That her calm response meant there was nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe that. A few days later, after one of our heavier conversations about the state of our relationship, I told her I wasn't ready to give up. That I wanted to try, really try, one last time. I remember choosing my words carefully. Not begging. Not demanding. Just honest. She agreed. She said she didn't want to end things either. That she was open to working on us. We talked about expectations. About communication. About effort. It felt fragile, but hopeful. I went to bed that night feeling lighter than I had in months. For a short while, things shifted. She was more present. More responsive. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. Enough that I told myself this was what progress looked like. Then came the night she said she'd be late. She explained it ahead of time. Something scheduled. Something reasonable. She sent a message saying she'd probably be home closer to 10. When she walked in, she was animated. Smiling. Talking quickly about her evening. She said she'd gone out for drinks after. With a friend. I didn't ask many questions. I didn't want to interrogate her. I didn't want to turn normal behavior into something suspicious. Later that night, she reached for me. It felt sudden. Almost out of sync with the weeks that had come before it. But I didn't question it. I didn't slow it down. I let myself believe that this was the turning point. That maybe all the distance, all the tension, had been a phase we were finally coming out of. The next morning, she was distant again. Not cold exactly, just reset. Like the closeness from the night before had never happened. I felt confused, but also hopeful. I told myself healing isn't linear. That intimacy comes and goes. That I shouldn't overanalyze one good moment. A couple of days later, while paying bills, I noticed a charge on our shared account I didn't recognize. It wasn't a big amount. Just enough to catch my eye. I stared at it longer than I should have. Clicked into the details. Still didn't recognize the name. I thought about asking her, but something stopped me. Not fear, hesitation. Like I didn't want to be that guy. The one who questions every transaction. Instead, I tried to figure it out on my own. I told myself I was just being practical. That I wanted to understand where our money was going. That it didn't mean anything. But the answer I found sat heavy in my stomach. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. That there were plenty of reasons for charges like that. That not everything has to connect. I didn't confront her right away. I walked around with that knowledge for a full day, pretending everything was normal. Talking about dinner plans. Helping with homework. Folding laundry. Every normal moment felt off, like I was acting in a play I hadn't agreed to be in. When I finally brought it up, I kept my voice neutral. She denied it immediately. Said it wasn't hers. Said it belonged to someone else. Someone she'd helped out. Someone she didn't want to embarrass by explaining further. Her explanation came with conditions. She wouldn't call to confirm it. Wouldn't clarify. Wouldn't offer proof. Just asked me to trust her. I told her I couldn't. That word, trust, hung between us like a dare. She said I was being unreasonable. That I was jumping to conclusions. That I was letting my anxiety run things again. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. Because part of me wanted desperately to be wrong. To rewind to before the charge, before the comment, before the sense that everything was balancing on a lie. But something had shifted. I could feel it. The way my body reacted. The way my chest tightened instead of relaxing when she spoke. I told her I couldn't move forward without clarity. She told me she couldn't give it. That was the first time I said the word out loud. That we were done. Saying it didn't bring relief. It brought shock. Like I'd jumped off something without checking how far down it was. The next day, we started talking about logistics. Paperwork. Numbers. Practical things that felt surreal next to the emotional wreckage still unfolding. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers sharing a space neither of us knew how to leave yet. She acted calm. Focused. Almost detached. I told myself that meant she was confident in the truth. But even as I tried to cling to that thought, I could feel something unraveling inside me. Because deep down, beneath the denial and the explanations and the false hope, there was a growing sense that I was standing on the edge of something far worse than I was ready to see. And I didn't yet know how close I was to stepping over it. I didn't go looking for the truth because I wanted to punish her. I went looking because the alternative was sitting in a house full of silence, letting my mind tear itself apart with maybes. We were already in the middle of ending things. Forms half-filled. Conversations stripped of emotion, reduced to logistics. Who would stay where? What we could afford. What would happen next? It felt unreal. Like we were role-playing a separation without fully understanding what we were separating from. That night, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, typing quickly. Focused. I asked what she was doing. Just checking something, she said. I didn't think much of it. We were both glued to screens those days. Avoidance disguised as productivity. Later, when she went to bed, I stayed on the couch. I wasn't tired. My body felt wired, like it didn't trust sleep anymore. Her laptop was still on the table. I told myself I was just going to close it. That I didn't want it sitting out overnight. That was the excuse I gave myself. When I opened it, the screen lit up immediately. She was still logged in. What caught my eye wasn't messages or photos. It was a page of questions. Conversations. Prompts. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I did. I sat down slowly, like my legs had given out. There were questions about things I recognized. Things I'd already suspected but tried not to name. Questions about timing. About consequences. About how to word messages so they sounded casual, confident, natural. I scrolled. And kept scrolling. There were conversations going back months. Different names. Different tones. Different versions of her. Some were flirtatious. Some explicit. Some logistical. Planning. Coordinating. Adjusting schedules. She wasn't confused. She was organized. My hands started shaking, so I took photos. Not because I knew what I'd do with them. Just because I needed proof that this was real. That I wasn't hallucinating. I remember thinking, this can't be everything. It was. There were multiple people. Not one mistake. Not one lapse in judgment. A pattern. She talked about meeting up while I was at work. About timing things around our routine. About what to say if I asked questions. There were entries about physical encounters, written casually, like notes in a planner. No emotion. No guilt. Just facts. I didn't read every word. I couldn't. My brain kept skipping ahead, trying to find the part where it would make sense. It never did. At one point, I realized I'd been sitting there for hours. My phone said it was after 3 in the morning. My body felt hollow, like everything inside me had been scooped out. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal. It was how normal she sounded. Not conflicted. Not torn. Not desperate. Just methodical. Like this was another part of her life she managed alongside everything else. I thought about all the nights I'd sat next to her on the couch, wondering why she felt so far away. She wasn't distant. She was elsewhere. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, trying to breathe quietly enough that I wouldn't wake her. My chest hurt. Not sharp pain. Pressure. Like something heavy was sitting right behind my ribs. I didn't sleep. When morning came, I felt detached from my own body. Like I was watching myself move through the house. She came into the kitchen like nothing had changed. Said good morning. Asked if I wanted coffee. I looked at her and felt something break. Did you ever think about telling me? I asked. She froze. What are you talking about? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her right away. I didn't have the energy. I saw it, I said. Your messages. The conversations. All of it. Her face drained of color. For a second, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me like she was recalculating. Then she sat down. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. That sentence almost made me laugh. You planned your life around lying to me, I said. You wrote out how to talk to other people. You thought about this constantly. And you're telling me you didn't want to hurt me? She didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She said she felt disconnected. That she didn't feel desired. That it just happened over time. I asked her when it started. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I thought about every moment I'd questioned myself. Every time I'd swallowed my instincts. Every time I'd told myself I was being unfair. I felt stupid. Not because I trusted her, but because I'd ignored myself. She tried to explain. Tried to frame it as confusion. As something that got out of hand. I stopped listening. The details blurred together. The names didn't matter. The timelines didn't help. Nothing she said could bridge the distance that had just opened between us. I remember asking one question that surprised even me. Did you ever stop and think about our kid? She looked down. That was the closest she came to shame. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Not then. I felt numb. Like my emotions had shut down to protect whatever was left of me. She asked what I wanted to do. The question felt absurd. I don't know how to exist in the same room as you right now, I said. That's all I know. We moved through the day in fragments. Avoiding each other. Speaking only when necessary. Every object in the house felt tainted. The couch where she'd sat texting. The bed where she'd slept next to me. The kitchen table where she'd planned things while I washed dishes. I kept thinking about how easily she'd come home. Kiss our kid. Ask about my day. Like she could switch lives without missing a beat. That realization hurt more than anything else. It meant the version of her I loved wasn't just gone. It might never have existed the way I thought it did. That night, after everyone else was asleep, I sat alone again. This time, the silence wasn't confusing. It was final. I realized then that there was no version of this where I could unsee what I'd seen. No explanation that would make it survivable. No apology that could rebuild what had been dismantled so carefully. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how to protect myself, or how to explain this to anyone, or how to carry it without breaking. All I knew was that the life I thought I was living had ended somewhere far behind me. And I was only just catching up to the truth. The days that followed blurred together in a way that still feels unreal when I think about it. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just heavy. We didn't have a big blow-up after the truth came out. No screaming matches. No thrown objects. The damage was already done. There was nothing left to detonate. Instead, everything collapsed quietly. We started talking about practical things almost immediately. Not because we were ready, but because reality doesn't pause for grief. Bills were still due. Work still expected us to show up. Our child still needed breakfast, homework help, bedtime stories. I remember thinking how cruel that was, that the world kept moving like nothing had happened. The house became a problem overnight. We'd poured everything into it. Savings. Time. Energy. Plans. It wasn't just a place to live, it was the symbol of our commitment. Proof that we were serious. That we were building something permanent. Now it felt like a trap. Neither of us could afford it alone. Selling it so soon would mean losses we couldn't easily absorb. Staying together under the same roof felt unbearable. Every option was bad. We sat at the kitchen table with numbers pulled up on our phones, talking in clipped sentences. Detached. Careful. Like two coworkers handling a crisis neither of us wanted to own. I noticed how composed she seemed. Not happy. Not relieved. Just steady. Focused on solving problems. That hurt in a way I didn't expect. I was falling apart internally, even if I wasn't showing it. Every small decision felt overwhelming. Where I'd sleep. When I'd see my child. What I'd tell people. She, on the other hand, seemed ready. It made me wonder how long she'd been preparing for this moment. We tried to coexist for a while. It didn't work. Every interaction felt strained. Neutral on the surface, sharp underneath. We avoided eye contact. Avoided unnecessary conversation. I slept on the couch. At first, it was temporary. Just to create space. Then it became the default. Lying there at night, staring at the ceiling, I replayed everything. Conversations. Moments. Signs I'd dismissed. I'd feel waves of anger come out of nowhere. Not explosive rage, more like a slow burn that settled into my bones. Then guilt would follow. About our child. About how this would affect her. About the kind of future we were dismantling. I tried to keep things normal for her. That was the hardest part. She didn't know why things felt different. She didn't understand why one parent was suddenly sleeping in a different place, why the energy in the house had changed. She asked questions I didn't know how to answer. Why are you on the couch? Why don't you eat together anymore? Are you mad? I told her I wasn't mad. That grown-ups sometimes need space. That we both loved her. All of that was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. The logistics kept piling up. Legal forms. Financial decisions. Conversations that felt too big for how numb I was. Every choice felt like another loss. I remember realizing one afternoon that there was no version of this where we both walked away intact. Someone was going to carry more damage. More disruption. I didn't know how to make peace with that. Friends started to notice something was wrong. I dodged questions. Gave vague answers. Said we were working through things. I wasn't ready to say the words out loud. Saying them felt like making it permanent. There were moments where I almost softened toward her. Not because I forgave her, but because familiarity has gravity. Because years of shared life don't disappear overnight. Then I'd remember what I'd seen. The planning. The deliberateness. The ease with which she'd lived both lives. And the distance would snap back into place. She apologized, in her way. Not with depth. Not with reflection. More like acknowledgement. Like checking off something she knew she was supposed to say. I know I hurt you. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't think you'd find out like that. Those sentences didn't land. They felt centered on her experience, not mine. I realized then that even in the aftermath, the imbalance was still there. I was expected to absorb the emotional weight, while she focused on moving forward. The house echoed with that imbalance. Shared spaces became neutral zones. No warmth. No hostility. Just avoidance. I started to feel like a guest in my own life. At work, I went through the motions. I answered emails. Attended meetings. Nodded at the right moments. Inside, I was unraveling. I'd catch myself staring at nothing, my mind looping the same questions. How did this happen? How long was I blind? Who was I actually married to? There was no satisfying answer. At some point, I realized I wasn't just grieving the relationship. I was grieving the version of myself who believed in it. The person who thought loyalty guaranteed safety. Who thought commitment was protection. Who trusted that if you built something carefully enough, it couldn't just collapse. That belief was gone. The practical consequences kept forcing themselves into focus. Deadlines. Decisions. Things that couldn't wait for emotional clarity. We talked about timelines. About separation. About next steps. Every conversation felt like chiseling away at something that used to be solid. I noticed how quickly she adapted to the new normal. How easily she shifted into independence. That realization sat heavy with me. It made me wonder if I was the only one losing something. By the end of that stretch, the house no longer felt like home. It felt like evidence. Like a monument to a future that had already failed. I understood then that the collapse wasn't just about what she'd done. It was about everything that came after, the quiet dismantling, the practical fallout, the realization that some betrayals don't explode. They erode. And by the time you notice the damage, you're already standing in the ruins, trying to figure out how to move forward without cutting yourself on what's left behind. The strangest part came later. Not right after everything fell apart. Not in the days when adrenaline carried me through paperwork and logistics. It came in the quieter moments, when there was finally space to think. That's when the questions started changing. At first, all I wanted to know was why. Why she did it. Why she lied. Why she stayed if she was already gone. Eventually, those questions stopped getting me anywhere. What replaced them was something harder to sit with, the realization that I hadn't imagined any of it. All those moments I'd second-guessed myself. The distance. The inconsistency. The feeling that something was off even when nothing obvious was wrong. I wasn't insecure. I wasn't paranoid. I was responding to reality without having access to the full picture. That understanding didn't bring relief the way I thought it might. It brought a different kind of grief. One that made me look back at myself with a mix of sadness and compassion. I'd spent so long assuming I was the problem. Every time she pulled away, I'd turned inward. Asked what I needed to fix. What I needed to be better at. I'd made myself smaller emotionally, quieter, more accommodating, because I thought that was love. Now I could see how that dynamic had worked in her favor. She never had to confront her own distance, because I was always busy interrogating mine. That wasn't something she explicitly demanded. She didn't sit me down and say, "Take responsibility for everything." It just happened. And I let it. That's a hard thing to admit. I don't tell this story to make myself look noble or blameless. I stayed longer than I should have. I ignored my instincts. I accepted explanations that didn't sit right because they were easier than the alternative. But I also know this: loyalty isn't a flaw. Trust isn't a weakness. Believing someone who shares a life and a child with you isn't naive, it's human. What broke me wasn't just what she did. It was how thoroughly she allowed me to believe I was the one failing while she lived a parallel life untouched by that doubt. The aftermath wasn't dramatic. There was no cinematic moment of closure. There were just long stretches of adjustment. Learning how to exist in a smaller space. Learning how to answer questions carefully. Learning how to be present for my child while carrying something heavy inside me. I worried constantly about the example I was setting. I didn't want her to grow up thinking this kind of relationship was normal. That love means confusion. That commitment means swallowing discomfort. At the same time, I didn't want her to grow up angry. Or bitter. Or afraid of trusting people. Balancing those things felt impossible. I focused on consistency. On being there. On showing up in ways that didn't require explanations she wasn't ready for. Some nights, after she was asleep, I'd sit alone and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The anger. The sadness. The sense of being replaced without my consent. Other nights, I felt nothing at all. Healing didn't move in a straight line. There were moments where I missed her. Not the person she was at the end, but the version I thought I knew. The life I believed we were building. The future that felt so certain for so long. Then I'd remember the truth. Not just the actions, but the deception. The planning. The way she'd looked me in the eye and told me I was overthinking. And the missing would fade into something quieter. Something more resolved. What stayed with me most was the shift in how I saw myself. I stopped measuring my worth by someone else's ability to stay faithful. I stopped asking what I could have done differently to prevent someone else's choices. That doesn't mean I stopped reflecting. I still look at my blind spots. My tendency to overfunction emotionally. My fear of confrontation. But I no longer confuse responsibility with self-erasure. The validation didn't come from anyone else. It came slowly, through clarity. Through realizing that love shouldn't feel like constant self-correction. That commitment shouldn't require you to doubt your own perception of reality. That if someone wants out, they owe you honesty, not a double life. I still don't have neat answers. I don't know if she ever really confronted what she did or if she simply moved on. I don't know if guilt caught up to her or if she rewrote the story in a way that made it easier to live with. What I do know is that I can live with myself. I didn't betray my values. I didn't abandon my child. I didn't trade integrity for comfort. And that matters more than I understood at the time. Sometimes I think about how easily this kind of thing hides. How many people are living in relationships where one person is quietly disengaging while the other is trying harder than ever to hold things together? It makes me wonder how often betrayal isn't about passion or impulse, but about avoidance. About choosing secrecy over honesty because honesty would require accountability. So I'll leave it with this. If someone loves you, but also lets you doubt your sanity while they plan a life that excludes you, what exactly are they protecting? Their freedom? Their comfort? Or just themselves? And at what point does staying silent become its own kind of betrayal?